Operation Jubilee, or the Dieppe Raid on the 19th of August 1942, was an Allied amphibious attack on the German-occupied port of Dieppe in northern France. Over 6,000 infantry, predominantly Canadian, supported by a regiment of tanks, were put ashore from a naval force. The port was to be captured and held for a short period to test the feasibility of a landing and to gather intelligence. This was one of the first attempts by the Western Allies on a German-held port city. Planning and preparation for the raid was minimal. Within 10 hours, 3,623 of the 6,086 men who landed had been killed, wounded, or became prisoner of war. A German major observed, "I have not witnessed images more terrible. In one landing craft, the entire crew of about 40 men had been wiped out by a direct hit. On the water, we could see bits of wrecks, ships in ruins, corpses floating, and soldiers wrestling with death." After the raid, the capture of a copy of the Dieppe plan allowed the Germans to analyze the operation. General Gerd von Rundstedt, the German commander-in-chief in the West, criticized the plan, saying that the plan is in German terms not a plan. It is more a position paper or the intended course of an exercise. Other senior German officers were equally unimpressed. General Konrad Haase, the commander of the 302nd Infantry Division, which protected the coastline, considered it incomprehensible that a division was expected to overrun a German regiment that was supported by artillery. The strength of naval and air forces were entirely insufficient to suppress the defenders during the landings. The Germans were unimpressed by the new British Churchill tanks left behind. The armament and armor were compared unfavorable with that used in German and Soviet tanks. Nearly 60 Churchill tanks were allocated to support the infantry. The tanks were expected to enter the town and reach a nearby airfield before retiring back to the beach. Half of the tank force would be held in reserve offshore. The 30 Churchills in that first two waves were landed on the beach under heavy German fire. 2 tanks sank en route to shore, and 11 were immobilized on the beach due to the combination of church shingle and indirect fire. Only 15 would get off the beach and over the seawall onto the Dieppe promenade. Although these tanks were effective in engaging the defenders in the town's buildings, their further progress was blocked by concrete defenses. The engineer demolition teams killed or pinned on the beach had not been able to accompany the tanks. 10 of the Churchills were able to return to the beach once the withdrawal had been signaled, but they could not be evacuated. The surviving tank crews fought to cover the withdrawal of the infantry from the beach, and almost all were captured with their vehicles having exhausted their main gun ammunition. The Luftwaffe, so the German Air Force, was also pleased with how it had performed during the air battle. The Luftwaffe played a major role in countering the raid, and the air battle over Dieppe proved to be one of the Focke-Wulf 190's finest hours. The 2 German fighter units involved, Jagdgeschwader, so Fighter Wing 2 and 26, both called upon 3 Focke-Wulf 190 fighter groups. One report judged the Focke-Wulf, which performed the bulk of the air defense, to be in every way suitable as a fighter bomber. It ascribed its good performance, despite its marked numerical superiority, to the aggressiveness and better training of the German fighter pilots. The Luftwaffe had been so active during the battle that only 70 of the 230 airframes available at the start of the day were combat ready by day's end. The Luftwaffe had consumed all its 20mm cannon ammunition available in the West, so much so that there was not enough for routine flight operations in the next couple of days. Overall, the Germans were pleased with their successful defense, whilst noting faults in their own communications, transport, and location of support forces, but recognized that the Allies were certain to learn some lessons from the operation and set about improving their fixed defenses. As the overall theater commander in the West, General Rundstedt was adamant that the Germans must learn the Dieppe lessons. He was anxious that the Germans were not left behind in learning from Dieppe. Just as we have gained the most valuable experiences from the day of Dieppe, the enemy has learned as well. Just as we evaluate the experience for the future, so will the enemy. Perhaps he will do this to an even greater extent because he was paid so dearly for it. The Dieppe Raid provoked longer-term strategic decisions. In October of 1942, the German High Command produced a memorandum regarding experience in coastal defense, which was provoked in large part by Dieppe. This document provided a framework for German commanders to plan coastal defense in the future. It laid down, amongst other principles, that air superiority was the key to a successful coastal defense strategy. While the Canadian contingent fought bravely in the face of a determined enemy, it was ultimately circumstances outside their control which sealed their fate. Despite criticism concerning the inexperience of the Canadian brigades, scholars have noted that even seasoned professionals would have been hard-pressed under the conditions brought about by their superiors. Dieppe became a textbook example of what not to do in amphibious operations and laid the framework for the Normandy landings 2 years later.